How's it going, guys? So George R. R. Martin today just responded to the announcement of the Game of Thrones spin-offs. He has confirmed that over the last few months he had been working in secret on 5 new Game of Thrones prequels. Very, very interesting. And although he hasn't told us what they'll be about, he has given us a few examples of what's not going to happen. So for those of you that were excited about seeing Robert's Rebellion, sorry, not gonna happen. Robert's Rebellion is not one of the spin-offs. And for those of you that really wanted the Dunk and Egg to be adapted, sorry, that's not happening either. Now, according to George R. R. Martin, there were originally 4 shows that they were going to work on, and he had conversations with all the writers discussing the world of Ice and Fire and all the history of Ice and Fire. And by the time they were done discussing all of it, they had decided to add a 5th show and also a 5th writer. So there's 5 writers that George R. R. Martin has been working with that are going to write these 5 new spin-offs. And we knew this was going to happen. Game of Thrones is, of course, a cash cow, so we knew the spin-offs were coming eventually. But 5, I don't know. I feel like a lot of times these companies get ahead of themselves. Like 5, like already. I just don't want it to get overcrowded. I don't want them to get ahead of themselves and trip up. It's like Sony with Spider-Man. They announced like 6 Spider-Man movies, and then when the Amazing Spider-Man didn't do so well, they canceled all the rest of them, and then we're like fumbling. And I don't want this to happen, because I think here we have actually a pretty good opportunity, because David and Dan won't have any involvement with these new shows, so we might see Ice and Fire adapted in a different way with new perspectives and new writers. So according to George R. R. Martin, there are already 5 pilot scripts, which I would love to get my hands on. As I said before, they are all prequels. There's no like after what happens in Game of Thrones, so they're not sequels. Now, George R. R. Martin did say that at least one of them would be actually on the continent of Westeros, but then the world of Ice and Fire is so huge, like these stories could be happening anywhere. There's the Age of Heroes, which I can just see so much storytelling that could come out of that time. There's all sorts of legends that come out of the Age of Heroes. It's where a lot of their songs and poems are from. They could talk about the Andal invasion or the first men migrating from the land bridge on Essos, maybe even the original fight with the Children of the Forest. That'd be very interesting to see, because I don't know if they're going to touch on that anymore in Game of Thrones, or if they're going to keep it a little bit more ambiguous and vague. I just think it would be interesting to see that original conflict and to see how really that war developed out of what I believe was just simple misunderstanding. The first men at that time didn't understand that by chopping down these sacred weirwood trees, they were killing off essentially the ancestors of the Children of the Forest, because when a child of the forest dies, their essence, in a sense, becomes a part of the weirwood tree net. So by cutting down those trees, they're erasing like all these memories of past lives. Of course, Aegon's conquest would be interesting. It gives an opportunity to bring back some dragons, and we'd get to see some pretty huge dragons. Balerion the Black Dread was so huge that his wingspan would block out entire towns. Like, he's way bigger than Drogon, who is Daenerys' largest dragon. Like, Balerion was huge. I'd like to see something in Yi-Ti. Yi-Ti I always found was very interesting, and there's a little bit about it in the world of Ice and Fire and what exactly happened to Yi-Ti. It was like this great Asian type empire that kind of like fell into chaos and ruin eventually through like a series of crazy events. I think it would be very interesting to see how that played out. There are a lot of things that they could do, and I know a lot of people wanted Dunk and Egg, but George R. R. Martin's reason for not wanting to do a Dunk and Egg made a lot of sense. He's not finished with those novellas, and he does not want this series to do the same thing that Game of Thrones did and get ahead of him, writing it, because that wouldn't be good. Now, he did say that maybe later on, when he's finished with it, he would allow them to do Dunk and Egg, but for right now, no, which I think is a good idea anyways, because I feel like Dunk and Egg would be kind of a lackluster story after Game of Thrones. Now, I don't know what order they're going to be doing these shows in, or if they're going to be several airing at once. And I don't know. I mean, you can do that. I mean, there was a point in time, Star Trek, where The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, three shows, were airing at once. And then you know what happened after that? Right after that, people kind of got tired of Star Trek, and then the next show, Enterprise, got canceled after like 4 seasons. So I feel like if they're gonna be telling all these stories, they're gonna have to find a way to keep it fresh. I feel like they all should be different. I feel like if they all feel the same, it it may fail because of that. Like I said, I don't want HBO to get ahead of themselves and slip up, because I feel like it's very easy for that to happen. So the writers on this show are Max Borenstein, Jane Goldman, Brian Hedgeland, and Carly Ray. And there's also a fifth writer that has yet to be announced. I wish them all the best of luck. I hope they keep in contact with George R. R. Martin so they make sure they get the things right that need to be gotten right, and make sure that, because I feel like these guys have a lot more leeway with the story that they can tell. I feel like the fans won't be as angry with them because a lot of these, because they kind of have more freedom. I feel like the problem with David and Dan is that A Song of Ice and Fire is one story that people wanted to see on screen, and then when it changed and they started doing all this other stuff, it pissed people off. But for these new stories that are going to be told, I feel like there's a lot of leeway. And I'm excited personally to see what they come up with. And like I said, I hope they keep up. I hope they keep in contact with George. I hope they consult him whenever there's a problem. And I'm interested to see what happens next. Okay, so that's pretty much all the information that we got about this now. Feel free to read George R. R. Martin's blog, which is where he posted all this stuff. And thank you guys for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe for more ideas of Ice and Fire.